The biggest thing I think is that I realized I wanted to do everything better.
And what do you mean by everything, Chip?
Relationships, marriage, my kids, my business. As an executive coach, I talk to 40 or 50 people on a regular basis, and I wanted to be better for them. The stroke slowed me down, because I'm a pretty type A personality, and so it slowed me down and caused me to be a better listener.
Welcome to the next episode of the Life in Transition podcast. The episode coming up, we talk with Chip Scholz. He's an amazing human being, recovery from a stroke, so what it takes to become healthy, mentally, emotionally, and physically, of course, and a lot about finding purpose and building your own business, coming from a corporate world into a business that has purpose for you. It's a great conversation. It's very useful to me. I think you're going to find it very useful to you, whether you're looking on just having a more fulfilling life, better relationships, or if you're making the transition from the corporate world to running your own business or finding purpose after retirement. All of those things we cover in great detail. He's author of several books, very successful coaching practice, artist, great grandfather and husband. So I think you're going to find this episode really interesting. Please share it with others who are going through those experiences that you think this might be useful to. Thank you. Welcome back to the Life in Transition podcast. I'm really excited today to have with us Chip Scholz, who is multi-time author, executive coach, post-stroke thriver, and a wood-turning creator. And also just introducing me to new friends where I live, Chip. So I really appreciate getting to know you. Welcome to the Life in Transition podcast.
Art, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. So jumping right into the conversation, Chip, what would you consider to be one of the most meaningful transitions that you've been through in your life?
Well, it's a transition I wouldn't have picked for myself, but having a stroke on March 29th, 2012 was a pretty big deal. But even before that, so my wife and I and family were living in California in 1998, and I was working as a lobbyist. I got laid off from the company I was working with, and we decided that we didn't want to be in California anymore. Neither of us. I'm from Chicago. My wife's from Rhode Island, so neither of us were from California.
We had family roots there.
Yeah, and we wanted to be back on the East Coast. And so big transition is going from working for people my whole life to then all of a sudden working for myself, which I didn't realize what a jerk my boss was when I did that. But you probably know something about that.
Did you work? Were you a lobbyist in your job, or was that what you did after you moved?
That's what I did in my job. So I was lobbyist for a company for about 10 years, up to May of '98 in California, and so and it's like all transitions. I spent my life in sales. I learned how to sell. My first job out of school was selling beans and corn and ketchup for Del Monte. I sold transportation services, and then I got into this. I was sales manager for the company I worked for, and my boss just saw something in me, and he said, nobody's talking to the cities. Why don't you go over there and start getting in trouble? And so, like all transitions, here I'd been in sales my whole life, but I was being asked to do something different. So you get pushed into an environment and you either learn or you die. That really is all the transitions.
But going to lobbyists is also sales. I mean, it's a different kind of sales, but it's definitely sales, right? If you're
It is. It is. It absolutely is. Then going to a situation where I had to go from working for a big company,
right,
which I'd always done, to working for myself and learning about self-employment and learning about all of the vagaries of self-employment and, what it's like to pay your quarterly taxes and do all of that kind of stuff that had all been done.
right. You
And
never had to think about it in a big company because there were people for that.
yeah. So that's a huge transition. and then and I think we made it okay, but I was doing all right in my business, but in 2012 I had the stroke. Talking about swimming upstream, I was very overweight. I had high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, all that kind of stuff. I was a stroke waiting to happen. And oh boy,
How
did
old
it.
were you at this time, Chip?
Just a little bit over 55.
Okay. Okay.
And it was something. So backstory of that is my dad and my mom had both died early. My dad was 51. He died of the treatment of cancer, and my mom was 56. 55, and she died of a bleeding aneurysm. I was 27 days shy of the date that my mother had died when I had the stroke.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a lot of physical DNA as well as mental.
Well, sure.
Connections with that, right?
Because you never feel like you're going to outlive your parents.
Right. Right.
And then all of a sudden I outlive my dad, and it's like, huh, I'm still here. Hmm. And maybe I need to start to amend my ways and, start to live a better life. And then bam, 2012 hit. You got some choices to make. And, I never was one of those kind of people that went into depression or, ever asked the question. I only asked it once is woe is me. I already said,
Like
why me? Yeah. So I only asked that one time, but
that's not bad.
it was kind of like, look, my mantra all the way through my business had been failure is not an option. And even though we fail every day,
Right.
even though we fail 100 times a day,
Right.
in the big picture, failure was not an option.
Yeah. If you keep moving,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So that's what got me through the stroke. And you mentioned wood turning. My wife bought me a lathe about a year after the stroke, and I thought my cognition was coming back pretty well, but it it just wasn't where I wanted it. I was reading 2 books a week before the stroke, and then after the stroke, I could hardly read a paragraph. And
Wow. It's a
yeah,
big difference.
yeah, it was, and I finally got back to reading a book, and then wife got me a lathe, and there was something about a 30-pound piece of spinning wood that wanted to take your head off. That it all of a sudden focuses you really strongly. So
To get your attention. And then also probably the repetition of it. Obviously, by looking around your office at your beautiful artwork,
yeah,
you've done it a lot of times, right?
yeah,
So the focus and then the repetition
yeah,
as well.
yeah. I love it.
I have two questions that are percolating here. One is with the stroke, what was the biggest thing that you learned? I mean, now you're healthy. You've made it, a long time. You're what, 14 years in?
Lost 110 pounds after the stroke. I walked a little bit before the stroke, but I walked. So after the stroke, I couldn't walk around the block. In fact, walking to the mailbox and back was a chore.
Wore you out.
I just started walking, and pretty soon it was 2 blocks and 3 blocks and 5 blocks, and I got to the point. So the first 2 years after I had the stroke, I walked 3,500 miles.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, and there's an app for everything, right? So
Sure.
I had that app right on me, but it was going back to failure's not an option. The biggest thing I think is that I realized I wanted to do everything better.
And what do you mean by everything, Jim?
Relationships,
Mm-hmm.
marriage,
Yeah.
my kids,
Yeah.
my business. As an executive coach, I talk to 40 or 50 people on a regular basis, and I wanted to be better for them. The stroke slowed me down, because I'm a pretty type A personality, and so it slowed me down and caused me to be a better listener.
What was it that made you want it to be better? Like what caused this? Was it just the realization of life is short and I could have died right now? Or was there something else? What was it that made you coming out of the stroke that you had this realization, okay, I want to be better in all aspects of my life?
That's a big thing, is knowing that you could die. Art, we all feel like we're bulletproof.
Yeah, which we're not.
We all think we're going to live forever. We all think that we are impermeable.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I wasn't. All of a sudden I was a little kid. I was a little child that needed help going to the bathroom. I never doubted that I was going to get physically better.
Right.
I never doubted that. Which my doctor was not as
Sure. I was
clear
going to say
about
that's
it.
not a given at that point. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it was for you, but it wouldn't
three
be.
3 months into it, my doctor said to me, he said, "Well, Chip, you've got to be aware that this is about all you've got." I said some rather unkind things, and
Yeah.
you know that was 14 years ago, and I'm still pissed off about it.
Yeah.
Um,
But it actually is a travesty. If I stop on that point for a minute, it actually is a travesty because whatever we think drives what we do. And if we're told by somebody that we put in the position of authority that we can't do it, we're much more likely to believe it.
oh God, yes, yeah, isn't that the truth?
100%. And if you want scientific backup for that, read Ellen Langer, Dr. Ellen Langer's work out of Harvard.
Yeah.
She's gotten
What
her
what was
latest
the
book is,
is what was it? It's the mindful body.
yeah, the mindful body,
Yeah, I've read it.
thinking our way to chronic vitality, right? To
Yeah,
chronic health. Yeah, she was on my podcast recently, and I've read her book, Mindfulness, back in 11, 12 years ago, and was floored by the studies she had in there. It was just fascinating.
yeah.
So when I had the chance to meet her a couple years ago, and then last year she was on my podcast, and yeah, so her studies are wild and crazy and amazing. That how much, even in my mind as a mechanical engineer, the physical aspects of the body can be completely affected by what
Well,
we think.
and they're not mechanical.
Yes, that's right. We think, I like to think they are because you have these, musculoskeletal systems, but even things as concrete as eyesight. People's eyesight changed in this one study she did, even though they didn't know their eyesight was even being measured, just by being separated. ROTC students in the university being separated into you're likely going to be a pilot and you're likely not, just because everyone knows that pilots have to have good eyesight, that the eyesight groups shifted from the mean by 12%, 10 to 12% in each direction,
Wow.
just by being told, and they didn't even know their eyesight was being tested.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Right.
the famous study about the kids that were separated into good group and poor group, and the teachers weren't told that the kids were just the same, but yeah, same kind of thing.
A completely different trajectory. Yeah, no, it's really powerful. So it is in one sense you think, oh, well, you want the doctors to be realistic and not get your hopes up and all of that. But the other is, for a lot of people, luckily you were a strong enough mind to say, bullshit, I'm not buying that, right? I want to go for it. But for a lot of people, it's not the case.
Here's one of the crazy stats is that 90% of the people that have a significant heart event are either back on the table or dead in 3 years.
Yeah.
Because they don't change what they're doing. That became the mantra as well. Okay, so failure is not an option, but it's like take care of yourself, eat right,
Well, yeah.
get the diabetes under control, handle the cholesterol issues. It's nothing that can't be. I mean, it can't be cured because I'm pretty chronic at this point, but it can.
But you can still get healthy.
Yeah, it can
You
be
can still
managed.
get healthy.
Yeah.
It can be managed and still get healthy. Yeah. No, I mean, it's absolutely right. There's so much that we can do. And most of us aren't willing to do the work to do it, right? But I had this peer advisory group that I put together that we had our meeting yesterday, our monthly meeting. And one of the guys on there is a great executive coach, Vince Fowler. And he was leading this one. And he talked about, what do you want? What do you need? Like, give yourself permission to want what you want. What do you need? And then what are you willing to suffer to get there?
Yeah.
What are you willing to give up? I do a lot of adventure sports, like it's super endurance stuff. And I don't even see it as suffering now, but it is. I mean, I know if I'm going to go do a 50-mile trail run, there's going to be a lot of 3 a.m. mornings, right? There's going to be a lot of, steep running. There's going to be lots of sweating in the summer, that's just part of it. Now, for me, I've learned to enjoy that part as well. So it doesn't feel like suffering anymore, but it's very clear. If you want to do X, then there's a certain amount, if you want to be healthy, guess what? Eating healthy and exercise are not an option.
Right.
If you want to have vitality, it's simply not an option. That's, whether you see it as suffering or not, that's something that you have to do to be healthy. That's great that you've done so well. So it made you, probably the look into the death that you weren't Superman anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm putting words in your mouth now, Chip, but this is what I felt when you were saying that. It's like, wow, there was a big dose of humility that came with that.
Oh God, yes.
And then that made you realize, like, wow, there's ways I can be better in my relationships. There's ways I can be better to myself, coming from that place of humility that I am not Superman, that I almost died and I need people and people need me. And both of those give me an obligation
Yeah.
to take better care of myself in a humble way.
Well, and what most people don't talk about, and I don't remember any of my doctors ever talking about, is the emotional wreckage that comes after a stroke. And you figure when it's, when your brain attacks you, there must be some kind of emotional situation. And knowing as much as I do about the amygdala and the interplay of the brain with the amygdala, I had this debilitating anxiety, and just if something went a little bit awry, it would just it was crippling. I lived with it for 3 or 4 years, and I finally went got help, and, I saw a therapist who sees other therapists,
Yeah.
yeah, because he's good at things like that, and we talked about, some ways, some strategies for handling the anxiety, and slowly but surely, I came out of it. But, after the stroke, my wife and kids would kid me because I'd be sitting there watching a Clydesdale commercial, and they'd have a puppy on there, and I'd turn into a puddle of tears. That
It's
in
not anxiety, Chip. That's healthy.
well, that is yeah, it is, but it isn't,
It
Um,
depends. It depends how much sadness that you've had in you bottled up your whole life that hasn't been released. I've been through this recently, so I actually know something about it.
yeah,
And there's, as men in this country, and especially type A men,
yeah.
it could be that we didn't cry for our first 50 years or 40 years, but there's a lot of sadness in there. And then if we get some humility, if we get some emotional healing, what happens is that sadness comes closer to the surface, and that's actually a good thing. And the only way to let it to healthfully let it out is to express it.
Well,
All right.
so I agree from the mental side, but I also know from talking to a number of friends that have had strokes that the physiological side is, there's just a rewiring, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Literally.
that rewire, yeah, and that rewiring is painful, and causes some of those issues, and it's like I said, I've just seen it with a whole bunch of my friends. So,
Mm.
I s a song that I really like still comes on, and I start to cry when I'm listening to the song, but, so I don't think the emotionality has left me, and I didn't have a problem crying. Um,
Before.
I cried when my dad died,
Mhm.
cried my eyes out, cried when my mom died, so I never really had a problem crying. Um,
Good.
but you're right, big boys don't cry, and, we're taught that, aren't we?
Yeah. And it's okay, and it's a part of the healing. Where, if you look at your life now, obviously so many things have changed since then.
Oh, sure.
But what do you feel like is the biggest thing that you've learned? Like, if you just think about your growth as a human being overall, what's the biggest takeaway for the growth that you've had because of or since your stroke?
This is gonna sound kinda corny, but it ain't a thing.
Anything ain't a
Yeah,
thing. It just
yeah,
don't sweat the small stuff.
yeah, yeah, and it's all small
And it,
stuff.
and it's also
Right.
and it's all small stuff.
Yeah. You read that
No,
book
that's
too.
yeah, a long time ago, but I
Yeah,
did. But yeah, that's such a good reminder, right? It's
yeah.
such a good reminder because it's really easy to get stressed out about stuff when your life is maybe over. You realize there's nothing that's big, that's big stuff.
I don't watch the news anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I read the Wall Street Journal in the morning and, read the op-eds because I know I'm gonna get a fairly balanced and,
Mm.
here's with the op-eds, at least you know who wrote the op-ed,
Exactly. So
so
you know where they're coming from. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah. When I
Yeah.
see an editorial from Donald Trump, or I see an editorial from Tim Walz, at least I know
You
there's
know
a
where
bit of,
they're coming from.
philosophical about it. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, and clearly, and it's funny how like watching the news is like trying to tell time with the second hand. Right. It really doesn't. Nothing changes in a short period of time, and we repeat the same stuff, and it doesn't do any benefit to
Yeah, and
to give us that stimulation that we think our world's falling apart because somewhere in the world something's falling apart. But there's 7 billion people on the planet, and that doesn't mean our world's falling apart. But our brains can't tell the difference if we're putting that in.
a 24-hour news cycle has done a lot of damage.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies about that actually. When news stations came into certain markets, the general well-being of the people in those markets went down from 7 to 11% in their own mindset,
Wow.
right? Because their life was pretty good before, but now
Yeah.
we have people screaming at us that the world's ending in some corner of the world, but it's still, still ending. And then we start to believe that, and that makes us feel worse about our life, even though our life didn't change.
Yep.
So it is pretty, but I think that's a really big one. I want to come back then on your other transitions career-wise. Like what was the most difficult part of leaving a company or leaving? Or did you leave or get fired or downsized or
Oh yeah, I got
let
downsized.
off?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you moved back east, what was the most difficult part of making it on your own? And why did you decide to make it on your own instead of going back with another company?
To say I was just a lobbyist is probably a little bit of a misnomer. Um, my official title was Director of Community Affairs. And so I played in a lot of golf tournaments and went to a lot of chicken dinners, and
Sounds like a pretty good job, Chip.
it was. I mean, it was the most fun I've ever had working for somebody else. Um, yeah, it was pretty cool. I also spent a lot of time in city council meetings, and
Sure.
LA County has 91 cities in it. And I was only in charge of a slice of about 30 of those cities. So I had to stay in touch with 30 city managers and 30 chief of police and 30, all of that. And and so, I got pretty good at it, but I also really enjoyed it. But towards the end, we went through, the boss who promoted me, believed in me, I learned under and all that kind of stuff, eventually got promoted. And I went through 5 bosses in 3 years.
Wow.
Here's the thing, my boss and I understood exactly what I was doing. The further away from that it got, they really didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
And so
Especially when you're in the field all the time and you're not in the office and you're
right, right. And so, one of the bosses, was a woman I worked with, and I was brought in to spend like a month with her, teaching her what I was doing to try to take it out throughout the company. And the company, I think at the time, had 25,000 employees and
right.
14 countries and all that kind of stuff. She just had a really difficult time getting it. And actually they brought me in to teach a class. It was a once a month class that I would teach people how to do what I did, which, from a mechanical standpoint, it was pretty easy. From the
From getting
the
someone's heart to shift if they're
from
not
the
already in that
humanity,
space.
yeah, exactly. Anyway, I went through 5 bosses in my last 3 years. The last boss, I knew that there was a reorg coming. I called him and I said, "Hey, who am I gonna be reporting to next week?" And he said, "Well, you're not." And I said, "Oh, I'm getting the package." He said, "Yeah, you are." And I said, "Okay, so who are you reporting to?" And he said, "I'm not." And I said, "Really? You're getting the package too?" And so he was in Seattle, I was in LA. He had to fly down to LA to give me the package and then fly back to Seattle to be given the package on himself. So it was really crazy. And here's the thing that didn't get me down. First of all, I kind of saw it coming. Second of all, I didn't want to work for anybody else anymore. I got really tired of working for other people. I got really tired
Right.
of being an employee, because I'm really not a good employee.
Right. Right. So if you're in the field left alone, you're doing good, but
Yeah,
the
having to
dance,
do all the corporate
being a
stuff.
marionette. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and one thing, so I was on the board of 26 Chamber of Commerce, and I was president or chairman of 4 of them.
Wow.
And there was one, the Torrance area chamber of commerce. Torrance, California is a pretty cool town, and it was the biggest chamber in the area, outside of the LA chamber, and it was a pretty cool gig. I mean, we had a pretty big budget, and it was good. And here I am with the people who ran Toyota and Honda and all that kind of stuff in the South Bay, some of the aerospace companies, TRW and that kind of stuff. And And,
You
it,
used to work for that one and was
oh,
customers were the other ones. Yeah.
yeah. So, it's pretty heady stuff, but
Yeah.
I always imagined, I always appreciated the people who hung their own shingle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and maybe they were trained to do that. Maybe they were accountants or attorneys or that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's people, I still remember there was a guy named Forrest Mayo. And Forrest and Forrest has been gone several years now, but Forrest was the tchotchke guy. He was the guy who sold all of the marketing tools and all the rulers and the little scrunchies and all that kind of,
Swag.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and he was such a joy to be around, and he had built the business absolutely from scratch.
Right. Right.
He had this idea and he built it from scratch, and
Right.
I always admired that.
Right.
And
So
and
you knew
so
when you got this package, you're like, hey, this is just my time. I've been wanting to be
yeah, yeah,
my
yeah.
own, have my own business, and that's what I'm going to start.
So we moved 3,500 miles from all my contacts to open up a
Right.
contact business.
Yes. So tell me about that. How did that work? I feel you a little bit,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I knew a couple people. So, one of the companies that I did some business with back in the day was a company called Waste Management. It's still around,
Yep.
the trash company,
Huge. Yep.
and and so I knew the people on the West Coast, and I said, "Hey, can you introduce me to anybody on the East Coast?" And so they did, and I started doing business with them. Um, and that led to some more business with other offices and that kind of stuff. There were some contacts that I made from there, but pretty much it was, I went to the Chamber of Commerce and, there's a couple things that drove me. And this is, this over time, but I started with this thing called the 5x5 system. The 5x5 system, I had coffee with the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Charlotte. And I said, who are the 5 people I need to know in Charlotte? And can I have their phone numbers? And can you tell them
Set
I'm
up
gonna
a
go
coffee
call 'em?
with them. Yep.
4 out of the 5 saw me. The 5th did not. One of those people was a lady named Ruth Shaw, who was the CAO of Duke Power in Charlotte, and we're still in
What's a
contact today.
CAO?
Chief Administrative Officer.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Thanks. That's one I hadn't heard
yeah.
before.
Yeah. And, she's quite a dear. And, you know, so there's 2 parts of that. One is that after you start doing that for a while, you end up with so many people to talk to that you really can't get to them all.
Yes.
The second part of that is that I always followed up with a handwritten note.
Right.
And, this was when email was just starting to be a thing, and texting was, that really
Clunky.
tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we
Three
just
three
had the
pushes per button. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So it wasn't that big a thing, but, even to this day, I send handwritten notes to people because
Yeah.
it's just so personal. Well, and that, that's the way of following up. So 5x5 system, and then the other thing is the 4-point system. And the 4-point system is that you have to get 4 points every day, not 20 points on Friday. And the 4 points is, you get a point for making a contact, 2 for making an appointment, 3 for going on the appointment, and 4 for closing business.
Very good.
And, if I got my 4 points by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was probably off to the golf course. But there were a lot of times where it was 5:30 and I was calling people in the Central and Eastern time, or,
Right. 1 hour
Cent
earlier.
yeah, yeah, exactly, to try to get my 4 points in. So, those are the way that
And
those
how
are my
long did
business.
it take you? How long did it take you? How long did you stick with that 4 points? To before you had traction to say this is really working.
Mm.
I know you had the mindset of failure is not an option, but how long? I would say how long until you felt like you were successful when you started your own business?
Oh, there were days, there were weeks, there were tough. It was probably a couple of years.
Yeah.
Here's, how if you wanna say big break. So I was giving a lot of speeches around Charlotte, and, every Rotary Club or every Kiwanis Club or Chamber of Commerce or whatever, I give a talk. at one of these talks, a guy came up to me afterwards and he said, you're the kind of guy that we need to come and speak to our convention in October. So the convention was at the Homestead in Virginia. Nice place. And I had 2 hours on a Saturday morning to talk to a whole bunch of business owners. It was the Southeastern Warehouse Association, guy named Bill Milligan. He's gone at this point, but it was a great opportunity. I got to know a lot of really cool people through there. I met him before the convention, and then we did some business after the convention. And then the head of the International Warehouse Logistics Association out of Chicago was at the convention. And he was there with his volunteer chair. And the volunteer chair said, "You're just the kind of guy that comes and needs to come and speak at our convention in Vegas in April." So I said, "Well, yes, I will." And in the meantime, they fired the executive director, and the somebody that I knew from SWA was on the board of IWLA and on the nominating committee for the new person, and called me and said, "Hey, you do these assessment things. Would you like to do them for us?" So I got to do assessments on the final 5 candidates, and the person that I recommended was the person they hired.
Right.
So
You have really strong trust there.
yeah, and so in Vegas, I gave my hour talk, and then they invited me up to one of the suites where I got a chance to debrief the new executive director with the board of directors
Right.
and tell them how they could work with him better.
You knew him so well and you had done the assessment on him and so forth. Yeah.
So there's 2 parts to that. First of all, the new executive director started calling me after he got into his office, and he'd say, "I'm thinking about this. What do you think? How would you?" And I would coach him through it.
And was that the start of your coaching business?
No, I'd been coaching up until then, but I'd never really coached. I wasn't coaching countrywide. I was doing more like within a 3-hour
Right.
around Charlotte. And I finally said to him, I said, this is what I do for a living, Joel. And he said, yeah. He said, I was kind of wondering about that. And he ended up writing me a check out of his own pocket for coaching services, and that was my first coaching client in the logistics
State.
business. Yeah.
Right.
And then every one of the board members who were in that meeting in that board or in the room at the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas became clients at one time or another.
Wow. 100%. Holy cow.
100%. In fact,
gotta
the
be-
guy who was the volunteer chair was a guy named Bob Ori, and Bob at another convention, he was sitting there and he said, "There's a guy that I want you to work with." And I said to him, "Well, I'm not going to work with him unless I'm working with you." That led to a whole bunch of things. And oh, by the way, he was CEO of a division of a company that he introduced me then to the owner of the company.
Right.
And this is a company that's a $1.5 billion logistics company. I still talk this guy named Herb Shear, and I still talk to Herb on a quarterly basis. And he sold his company in 2015, just because we like each other and we hit it off. That was really the launch pad.
So
And all the stuff that I'd done up to that is about 2005 when that happened. All the stuff that I'd done up to that was preparing me for bigger things.
so that was 2005. When did you move cross country?
99.
99. So this is 6 years later.
Yeah.
So sort of 18 months, 2 years until you felt like you are legit, you're successful, you're making enough money to live. And then it was still 4 years later of continuing that, I won't say grind, but that kind of energy and putting it out there and saying yes to whatever opportunities came your way, where you really upped your game.
Yep.
So,
And so when I had the stroke in 2012, I had some really great clients. Herb Shear was a really great client, and he stuck with me, and I worked with a big part of his team all the way up until they sold to Federal Express. It just I just had there was another guy, Dave Thaler. He's with a company called Haskell, in Florida. We've talked about that. I've known David for 25 years, and he hung by me. He was the one who took me to the hospital and took care of me.
So were you out of town with him down here when you had the stroke?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's
Did
a
you,
phone call that your wife never wants to get, right?
yeah. Did you end up going to Mayo or somewhere else?
I was over in Baptist.
Okay, Baptist. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
And here's the kind of wild part is that his assistant just happened to be in the office when I came in, and she said, "You look horrible. Would you like to see somebody?" And I said, "Yes, I would." I didn't say it quite like that, and not as clearly, but
Right.
her cousin was a concierge doc in Jacksonville, and she took me over to him, and he said, "You're having a stroke," and walked me in past all the stuff at Baptist.
Baptist ER.
Yeah, got me a bed right away and everything, so,
Which in the seconds count when you're having
yeah,
a stroke.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's really amazing. So coming back to this career transition, because we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are in career transition. They're looking for meaning. It's midlife. What would you say is your biggest takeaway or biggest advice to someone who's wanting to change, especially if they're changing from a corporate environment, maybe to on their own? What's the one takeaway, the one tool that you would say is really key if you want to make it in your own business?
Art, I don't think there's really one, because that would just be too simple.
So then
Um,
what are the top few that are necessary? Is it this 4 point or is it
no, 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 those are mechanisms.
right?
It's attitude. It's all attitude. It's developing, maybe it's, failure is not an option. One of my favorite other sayings, and I repeat it often, and people get really sick of hearing it, is Semper Gumby. And Semper Gumby, so Semper is always, and
Right.
and Gumby is, well, in fact, I have a
The Gumby, the green
yeah,
Gumby that you're
yeah,
talking about?
exactly,
Yeah.
green Gumby, the Art Clokey, claymation character who's always flexible, right? He could fold himself and slot under doors. Well,
Right.
it's always flexible. Semper Gumby is always flexible,
Right.
and that is so important when you're in your own business. Because, at the first few years, I thought there was only one way to do it,
Right. Right.
and I was told repeatedly that no, that's not the case. And so, it was learning that you don't do business the way you want to do it. You do business the way
Yes.
that your customer wants to do it,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, failure is not an option, but Semper Gumby. So
Yeah.
if something doesn't work
Which is
out,
what
then
makes failure not an option mean something.
yeah,
Because if you're not flexible, then you're just stupid to say failure is not an option and keep banging your head against the same door.
sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But together with Semper Gumby, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember a conversation I had. In my career, we were losing our biggest customer, which is an account I built, billion plus account. I was trying to coach my boss to get back in good standing. My boss was a CEO, a big, it's a $10 billion company.
Yep.
And he was really upset with this customer, and they were really upset with him. And I asked him the question. I said, "Do you want to be right, or do you want to make business? Because
Well,
there's not room for both."
that
You know?
that is every comedian says you can either be right or you can be happy.
Yeah, yeah. You can be right, or you can be in a relationship. You can be right, or you can have the business, right?
That's right.
And you have to choose, right?
Yeah.
And it was an interesting conversation. He's like, "Well, what do I need to do?" I'm like, "Well, you need to fire yourself and the regional president." And he's like, "Well, I don't want to do that." I'm like, "What else could I do?" I was like, "Well, if you let me coach you really well, maybe you can teach you how to do some rapport and some modeling and listen and say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, instead of no, did you know it's like this?" And see if we can, rebuild the relationship a little
And
bit.
and that is the fun part, especially of coaching. So my business has a lot of different facets to it, but I do love the coaching, and I fully intend to coach as long as I possibly can. I don't plan to coach from a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV
Yeah.
bag, but
Yeah.
but I do plan to coach as long as I possibly can. I've got a good friend, guy named George Richardson, and he's a coach. He's in his 80s, and he's out on the West Coast, and he's still coaching, and
Yeah.
He's still, I saw him at a conference last week, and he's still learning, still growing, still doing everything.
Absolutely.
So I plan to be that
Well, and
guy.
that's what makes life, like, we put into it, right? And I think there's this idea of retirement, and I want to get your input on this too, Chip, like what you think about that. But this old school idea we have about retirement, I think is such a misnomer, because you know what happens for the retirement. There's interesting research on this. There's 3 phases to retirement, what we used to call retirement, which is vacation, where you're happy for a little while, lasts for 6 to 12 months. Depression, because you realize you have nothing to do. And then the third phase splits. You find purpose or you die. Right. And so I think the way we talk about retirement in the past, it doesn't make any sense. Like that we should work hard and save up so that we can enjoy ourselves at the end. What about finding purpose in the second phase, after you've got a little bit over the hump of, like, I've met my bills and I can pay the mortgage and so forth. And then you can do that in a sustainable and enjoyable way
Mm-hmm.
forever.
Well, have you read The Second Mountain by David Brooks?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was one of the books that was a catalyst for me turning into this midlife transition mastery, focus and expert. I mean, David Brooks, Arthur Brooks, Chip Connolly. I mean, there's Transitions by Bruce Seiler, I want to say off the top of my head right now. The name's escaping me. But yeah, there's so much research in this space, and you see it, that people, as they age, the ones that have purpose thrive.
Well,
The ones that don't die.
so, in his parlance, the first mountain is all about position and power and money and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. The second is about purpose. But he says that to get to the second mountain, you've got to
You
have,
have to do the
you have to, well, no, you have to do the first, but you also have to have a value. You have to have a crisis. And I know a lot of people have never had a crisis. My dad had a great saying for this. He said, and it's a long story how it came about, but he said, "You've never been kicked in the teeth." I mean, I was really young when he said this, but he said, "You've never been kicked in the teeth." Well, that is that crisis. That is that thing that that
And
you
when
go
was your
through.
kick in the teeth? When was your kick in the teeth?
You know,
Because I'm wondering how you define it, because I've got my own thoughts in mind, but I'm curious, Chip, what was your kick in the teeth?
for me, it was a stroke.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I would have said, but if I didn't have the stroke, I would have said maybe it was becoming a coach or going into my own business or getting laid off or whatever.
Right.
Um, but I really have to say it was a stroke because again, coming out of the stroke, I just wanted to do everything better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, whether you call it a crisis or a kick in the teeth or a rock bottom story,
Or the valley or
or
whatever.
the valley, like, David Brooks talks about, you climb down the first mountain, and walk through the valley, and before you can find the second mountain. But to me, I think there's the crisis, or getting kicked in the teeth, is where we realize that we're not invincible. We are not God. We are not Superman. And that comes with a dose of humility, which leads to compassion, which is what's necessary for us to integrate, thrive, support, weave. I talk a lot about weaving into the fabric of a community and not just being a lone thread. If you're a lone thread and you break, you're lost, or you blow away in the wind. If you're woven into the fabric, you break. Everybody else holds you. You don't even notice it, and you take turns. Sometimes you're the thread that breaks, and sometimes you're the one holding the other thread that breaks. You and 5 or 10 other people. But I think I feel like, for myself and talking to you and many, many others, I feel like it's not possible to live in this sustainable longevity contribution way without that humility that comes from some sort of crisis, some sort of realizing that we're not invincible. I woke up at 3 a.m. a lot when I was in crisis, trying to figure out whether to leave my job or not. When had eventually, during COVID, they eventually diagnosed it as chronic fatigue syndrome, because they didn't know what else. But I was in bed for the better part of 12 weeks. For a guy that's, running marathons and running a global business, that was incredibly frightening.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
But coming out of that, realizing that I'm not Superman, and that I'm one of many, and that I'm not something special. Not that I'm not capable and can't do things. It was very, very humbling, and allowed me, very similar to you, to change my relationships. to be a better father, better husband, to accept, my place among many and not have to take up so much space in the room. Right. And that's made a huge difference for how I'm interacting and living in the second half of my life.
So my mother-in-law was a wonderful woman. She died 12 days shy of 98. She died in my easy chair on my wife's arms.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, and I was a witness to it. And I loved her. I loved her a lot. She was an incredible woman. She was also extremely crafty. She did this thing called theorem painting, and theorem painting is painting on this really fine white velvet with oils and using stencils and all that kind of stuff. So we've got a lot of her stuff on our walls around the house. She did calligraphy. She was always doing something crafty. She knitted, she crocheted, she did,
right.
all this kind of stuff. And she had bugged me for years to get a hobby.
Right. Right.
And so coming out of the stroke and reordering a lot of the things that I was doing in my life, my wife gave me a lathe for Christmas. And I just took to it like, it was a second life. I already like to do woodworking. I just didn't really like flat work because you have to be exact and, you measure and all that kind of stuff.
Symmetrical and
Yeah, I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm not a mechanical engineer. Um, I'm more on the side. And here's the thing. Did you ever read the Extended Mind by
no.
Annie Paul? Fascinating book. And one of the things she talks about was how our minds are drawn to round things. And she says that's why we're so comfortable in taking a walk in nature. And I think you probably read the Steve Jobs biography. Steve Jobs talked about how he would take people on these extended walks around the hills in outside of Palo Alto. And and here's the thing: there are no square corners in nature.
Yeah. No precise square corners. Absolutely not.
Right.
At minimum, they're rounded corners.
Yes,
Nothing will
yeah.
pass with a precise square corner.
Yeah, exactly. And even though, you can think of jagged cliffs or that kind of stuff, they're never the same.
Yeah.
It's
That's what.
not
Yeah.
it's not like
they're not right angle and they're not. Yeah.
yeah, so in our built environment, we have all kinds of and so what her premise is that we relax so much more when we see round stuff. Well, do you see anything that's a square
Right.
behind me?
Right. Right.
No, no, it's all round stuff. And so I think working with a lathe was, it just, first of all, it unlocked a huge amount of cognitive resources that I thought I had gotten back but didn't.
Right. Right.
I thought my cognition was pretty good year into the stroke. It wasn't. It wasn't.
Right.
It was not as good. Cognitively, it saved me.
Right.
But it's something that I've done for years now, and in fact, I teach wood turning. I'm president of the North Carolina Wood Turners Association, and I have a ball with that. I guess you're only supposed to be for 1 year, but I'm starting my fourth year, and it's just kind of the way it goes. But it's when you start to think about that second mountain, when you start to think about purpose and meaning, I don't make a lot of money. I mean, yeah, if you want to make $2 million, or excuse me, if you want to make $1 million turning wood, start with 2 million.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Because it's very expensive to get into it. So I'm never gonna get rich off of wood turning.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm never really going to pay for myself in wood turning,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it's just something I love, and I love teaching a wood turning 1-on-1 course because I get to take people that have never turned a thing in their life,
Right.
and they walk out with something. Yeah, Yeah, and it's such a cool feeling. So that's that whole purpose and meaning. It's
Yeah.
like, look, I don't intend to retire. I don't intend to, I intend to ride off into the sunset, but
Mm.
it's that I know what I'm going to do, even if I'm not able to continue coaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No. And in the meantime, I think this is the thing that I think we see a lot is, the traditional, since Germany in the 18 whatever 90s, coined retirement, we've seen life as, these three parts. You get educated, you work hard to make money, and then you retire and have a good
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
And a much healthier way to live is that you learn, you earn, you keep learning while you earn, and you start doing things that you enjoy, and you continue to do all three. Like if you look at, Richard Branson's life where he works and plays and works
Mhm.
out
Yep.
every day,
Yep.
right? It's not compartmentalized. Yes, there'll be ebbs and flows where you'll take a sabbatical maybe, or you'll
Well,
work harder for a season
and
because you need
not
to.
come on, Art. Not everybody can be Richard Branson.
No, for sure. But we can all do something that's a hobby
That's
that
it.
feeds our creativity, feeds our soul, helps us connect with other people. My father-in-law, who had a lot of, he was, retired from the military, had a project management construction career. After that, had his own company, worked for other big construction companies. Then he started doing beekeeping and then teaching beekeeping until he was 80. And he, was teaching beekeeping to vets and so forth. And now he's 81 and he's like, all right, Art, what's next? What's my next career? And I think that's so, and he's 81 and they travel across the country in their RV all the time and doing all kinds of stuff. And he's actively looking for like, okay, what's my next career? He wrote a little book about his life, it's very interesting stories in the military and so forth. But I think that's the thing is, how do you live a balanced life the whole way along and find joy, share your creativity, share your wisdom. And it's in different intensities as you go, but never for one to stop and start, but all of them running through the whole tapestry of life.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned, writing books, and do you mind if I just share a couple things with.
No. Yeah.
So I wrote a book in 2009 with 8 other or with 7 other people called, Selling for Geniuses, and it was for people like us that were in business for ourselves, but had to do, we're seller doers.
Yep.
Um, then in 2011, I wrote a book with 2 other people called "Do Eagles Just Swing It?" And I think they were both pretty good books, but they were still early in the career and all that kind of stuff. So I have the stroke in 2012. Well, I've always wanted to write. This is the book that I've always wanted to write. Is Small Decisions, Big Shifts, and so it sat in a drawer. I worked with a ghostwriter for a little while, and I didn't really like the output of the ghostwriter, and I didn't really like the direction we were going, and it sat in a drawer for 5 years.
Yep.
Um, a couple years ago, 2 of my daughters gave me Storyworth for Christmas, or excuse me, for Father's Day. Have you ever heard of Storyworth?
No.
So Storyworth is a platform that sends you a question a week, and you write the answer to the question. And there are questions like, what was your dad like when you were a kid? What's your favorite vacation?
Right.
What was your first car?
So
That
you're
kind of stuff.
writing an autobiography to some extent.
Right. And so over the course of the next year, I wrote 60 stories. It ended up being 411 pages because what they do at the end of the year is they publish it in a book and send you the book.
All right. Nice.
And so all my kids have a book and we have a book, 411 pages, and it got me back into writing.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the
So
habit, right? If you're a writer, you write, right?
yeah, so Small Decisions, Big Shifts came out of that. I finally sat down and I said, damn it, if I can write, I can start to do that. And so I finished the book, went under contract in December of 24. And it came out about in October, and that got me going. And I wrote another book. It's coming out in March. And it took me 6 weeks to write that.
Oh, wow.
And I've got another one that I just signed the contract on last week, that's coming out in October, and that took me about
Congratulations.
6
Huh?
months
That's awesome.
to write, and and I've got another one I've just started on, but it just kind of opens the floodgates. But to your
Right.
point, it's just the purpose thing, you know?
Right.
So,
Yeah. No, that's really important. So for somebody that's looking for that purpose for themselves, what is their second mountain? What's one thing you've synthesized from all the different purposes you've found in this second half that could help them along their path to purpose?
and listen, I'm not saying this to be, to sell books, but I've got this thing called the 5 C's that I use.
Yeah.
And anybody can use them, and just, there's tools that anybody can use, but it's context, clarity, conditioning, choice, and character. Context is understanding where you are, understanding your situation, understanding what you're doing, understanding, who you're in a relationship with. It's being brutally honest about who you are. Clarity is being sure in no uncertain terms what you want.
Right. Very
Con
difficult for some
Right.
people.
Well, it's impossible for some people because some people have no idea what they want. In fact, you probably heard the 80-10-10 thing where 10% know what they want and do it and they're really happy. 10% know what they want but don't ever get around to it.
Right.
And they kind of let it happen. And then there's 80% of people that have no idea what they want, but they just ask what happened.
Right. Right.
You know, and so yeah, most people don't ever know what they want or don't say what they want. Maybe it's FOMO or whatever it is.
Yeah. And also, I think
Um,
there's a big fear of like, there's a part of us that doesn't think it's okay to want what we want. Right. And that's something that is also important to let go of.
yeah, and then conditioning is getting your mind right, changing your mind. One of the things that happened after the stroke is I lost 110 pounds, and I had to start thinking like a skinny person. And I'd been a big guy most of my life. If I showed you some pictures from before that, I was a big guy most of my life, and so all of a sudden, I wasn't, and I'm still a big guy, but hey. And then choice. I have this thing called waypoints that are like goals, but they're planned out. They're planned out in a whole bunch of different steps. And then character is about how you put it all together. It's about personal accountability. It's about holding yourself accountable because I don't really believe that anybody else can hold you accountable other than you. And
They could definitely support, but they can only support you as much as you're supportable.
exactly. And what all that leads to is that leads to purpose. You've read Man's Search for Meaning,
For
Frankl.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in my third reading of it right now.
Yeah, and it keeps popping up. I mean, I found it probably 20 years ago, and you
Yeah.
just keep.
I read it in college and I read it again 2 or 3 years ago and now again.
I wish I had read it in college, but it's a really simple but very difficult process to come up with a purpose statement.
Right.
And the purpose statement that I talk about is I live to blank blank.
Right. Right.
It's only got 2 blanks. It doesn't have
So
10,
you can't be too complicated. Yeah.
right? I live to blank blank. Mine is I live to develop people.
Yeah.
And that's what I do from the time I get up in the morning to the time I go to bed. I live to develop people. And it's people, it's not others, because I can't give what I don't have.
That's right. That's right.
So
And
I
others is
have
such a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I have to be the best I can be to allow other people to be the best they can be. And so it's just as simple as that. And here's the thing. Did you ever read it was Poe Bronson, What Should I Do with My Life?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, what was your
Long time ago. But
what was your takeaway from that?
wow, that was
I think that came out in
20
2006.
years. So say 20 years ago. So that's
Yeah.
probably when I read it 20 years ago. I don't remember really what my takeaway was from.
So here's the cool thing. Poe, a couple years after that, wrote a follow-up in Fast Company. And if you go to Fast Company and Poe Bronson,
Right.
it's a great article because he said what do you remember when The Secret was a big thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So The Secret, write a check to the universe, everything could be manifested, all that kind of,
Right.
pardon me, but the horse
Deep.
press. Yes.
Yeah.
So he said, I have been confused with some people that think I'm I'm purporting to say that you need to have this great, huge purpose that is, transcendent and, kind of like he didn't mention The Secret, but I knew what he was talking about.
Right.
And he said, he said, your purpose is probably your family. Your purpose is probably what you do every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not some, I'm going to
Save the world or
braid
whatever.
braid my hair and follow Buddha,
Right. Right.
and I that just really spoke to me. He also said that, and I love this phrase. He said, "We are not the architects of our own success.
Interesting.
We are often not the architects of our own success."
Which is also very humbling and true, actually. Right.
Really?
It's actually true as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And very humbling. And it also takes a lot of pressure off in a way too.
It's why when I'm working for a company, I can stay working for the company even though I want to go and do my own thing.
Right. Right.
Because you get those gold
So-
handcuffs and,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was lucky enough to be able to break my golden handcuffs and take a little bit of the gold with me. But it's interesting. There's a few things that come up here when I think about that. One is Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. Whatever you're doing right now is your purpose. If you're walking upstairs right now, that's your purpose. Do it with full intention. That simple. Another one that, like, when you said I am about, or what was yours?
I live to develop people, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The one that comes to mind for me right now is one that I got on a medicine journey that I did was if I said it that way, I say, I live to hold space and bear witness, which I'm doing right now.
Yes, you are.
That comes up for me. Then another one is, Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, and Big Magic. And I asked about this thing about purpose. And she said, purpose has been co-opted. It's been corrupted with, I got to find something that I love to do that's going to save the planet that I can monetize and make $100 million. And it's just horrible. And that completely distorts what it's all about. And so she said, for me now in my life, she said, I've tried to forget the word purpose and just simply think about service.
Yeah.
How can I serve the situation? Coming back to Viktor Frankl, what does life expect of me right now? Right. Or Michael Singer. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff.
I have not.
Yeah. But he talks about, like our only job is to enjoy the moments we have and respond to what they need. All right. It's very different than I'm going to go out and conquer the world. But Elizabeth Gilbert talked about just like that previous weekend, she'd been at a wedding. And she said, I was there because it was a close friend was invited. I wasn't that close. I wasn't involved in any of the festivities. And I was just talking to this young lady, and she was talking about, I got to go because I got to take 3 buses to get to the train to get back to the airport. And she's like, well, I'll just give you a ride. And she's like, really? She said, yeah, you can stay and enjoy another hour, and then I'll give you a ride. Just because that's what the moment was asking for, nothing else. And to be satisfied with that. So there is, and I have this, greater purpose statement that I got from several workshops. I've got Tony Robbins, I've got Stephen Covey, some purpose statements that I've done with all of them. And I think that for most of us, most days, most of the time, it's to respond to the moment in front of us in the right way. Tom Vaso was on a podcast recently. He's a CEO emeritus of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, the gang rehabilitation charity. And he also ran big business, like me, very similar. And he said, what I found out there at Homeboys is that the most important purpose I have is the person sitting in front of me right now. All right. And whatever it is that they need, even if something else is slipping, even if something else is falling down, if I take care of the person in front of me right now, then I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great place to wrap it up, that it doesn't have to be something significant. We all can be good to ourselves and to our family and to our neighbors and to our coworkers.
Absolutely.
And if we all do that, maybe the news will slowly get better, and especially if we don't watch it. So Chip, I really, you got that. I really appreciate your candid conversation. And I want to say congratulations on getting your health back, or maybe even getting your health, if I say it that way. And also for having a really strong creative outlet while you're still also being productive and helping professionally as well. I think you're a good example for a well-rounded life at your point in life. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate your candid and wise conversation today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Art, has been an absolute joy. It really has been. You're a great interviewer, and you ask great questions, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. If people want to get in touch with you, Chip, what's the best way to do that?
Through my website, scholzassociates.com. I think I think my phone number's there. Might not be, but there's an email link there.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. Well, Chip, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being a guest today on Life in Transition podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Life in Transition podcast. I really appreciate your support. The best way you can support is to leave a review. Let me know how it's going. Leave a rating, leave a review, and share with somebody that you know can really benefit. They're going to love it, and you're going to make a new friend. Thank you.